Dum dum dum. Test, 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 test. 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 One, two, three, four. Yeah. Test, test, test. Maybe we got it. Dum dum.
And the biggest complaint I have is that people can't get to see everything they want to see. There's going to be pizza coming later, but I got it ordered a little bit late, but there will be some pizza coming. And I have drink tickets if you need another one. I'll go for 2. And tonight we have, do you have anything to say, Damien?
No.
Okay. And tonight we have Joe Homnick speaking, and take it away.
We're going to use this.
Okay.
All right. Is that working? Yeah. All right, Joe Homnick. See a lot of familiar faces here, but for those of you that I haven't met yet, I've been doing this for quite a while. As a matter of fact, I have my 1997 precursor to Code Camp, known as Dev Days, jacket, which we did, yep. Could have been. 30 plus years working in the IT, and I actually started out as a CPA working for a company known as Pete Marwick in their audit department. It's now the PM and KPMG. So I kind of have this accounting background, which really lends itself right into the blockchain. I even had a prop, but I guess we didn't bring it in. I had the green eye shade hat that you also see poker dealers wear, but the accountants used to wear it. And I'm going to do some references to ledgers, transaction ledgers, and accounting, along with explaining this blockchain. So, like I said, been around a long time, have an accounting background, and basically the way I got into IT was, it was the early mid-'80s, and computers were just catching on then, so I came into the audit department, and all the old guys didn't want to have anything to do with computers. So it was, hey, new guy, you're going to become the computer audit specialist. So, I mean, just happened to be the perfect timing to get into the whole IT thing, and have been doing it ever since. Still have my accounting kind of roots, though. So anyway, also run the GC users group. If you want these slides, they're up at the Meetup group. And I'm also a regional director if you wanted more information on that. So this whole blockchain thing, and yeah, we'll talk about Bitcoin in a little bit, but this whole blockchain thing is really a disruptive type of technology. Disruptive to the point of, we're talking internet disruptive. So I predict, and many do, over the next couple of years, this is going to be really be implemented by just about every company and replace a lot of the middlemen in the process. So that's that whole disruptive part. It's like all of a sudden, ooh, why do we need title insurance? Why do we need a broker for this process? And so forth. So that's the real disruptive part of it. And it's something that you should be aware of as we're going in here. But you can see that it's getting a lot of press. Well, Bitcoin price is also getting a lot of press, right? So, but we're talking really mostly about blockchain. And what I'm going to do is talk about a few of the implementations of blockchain that we're seeing right now. Well, the original one really, or the main original one was Bitcoin, which we'll get to. But you're seeing things like WebJet. And interestingly enough, Microsoft has a blockchain as a service, BaaS, blockchain as a service offering in Azure, which basically what it does is fire up, I'll show you at the very end, fires up a bunch of virtual machines that create a distributed ledger that you could then create for your own types of contracts. And also, you heard something about Code Camp. I'm going to do a session in Code Camp where we actually deploy a custom blockchain. Oh, Mo, did I have my green visor? Oh. I also had detached retina surgery a couple days ago, so if I don't see things. All right, I got my... So I guess it keeps the glare down or something as you're sitting there writing. All right, I use my prop. Okay, so some examples of people that are using this blockchain as a service. And when you think about blockchain, think about contracts directly between the individual vendor and the customer. Completing transactions that took in the past middlemen to complete it. Also think about a ledger system. So starting right off, WebJet, rents out jets, very expensive type of a service, but they also added a service that would book hotel rooms. And they basically said, okay, well, we got to work with each one of these individual hotels over and over and over, confirm transactions all along the way. Let's set up a blockchain type of a transaction system to handle this so that the hotel would work directly against their blockchain, the customer would work directly against the blockchain, and work everything out in that type of a fashion. Instead of having to call back and forth, make the arrangements, make sure I'm going to be there, go to their website, it all stays within the transaction of the individual WebJet implementation. Another one, and here's a great use for it. Transportation. Anybody in the transportation business here? He didn't even look up. I knew that. So what about like shipping goods? Or I just saw this big ad by Verizon, how they made sure when fruit was being shipped to different locations, how they could maintain, what the different temperatures were and so forth. Also, maybe shipping containers to different locations. What's the chain of custody that it goes through? When did each of these transactions occur? So Maersk, I believe that's how you say it, did this whole type of thing around ensuring different shipments, so you knew every individual step within the shipment scenario. Another one, bank guarantees. Instead of the individual customer having to go down to the different outlets and talk to individual customer reps and call them on the phone, they basically set up this distributed ledger that they could rely upon to be able to perform those individual transactions. So start thinking about, hey, all of a sudden these kind of middlemen are being taken out of the equation. You don't need to go in and talk to that loan officer. You don't need to talk to that customer service rep at the hotel. The disruptive nature of it. Here's a whole nother one, trading. You've already seen this. Anybody heard that the Bitcoin futures can now be traded? Chicago Mercantile, want to go out, buy some futures? Which also shot the price up like crazy over the last week because it just went live. So a trading type of scenario is a perfect blockchain type of an implementation, where you're performing transactions and you want to verify that these transactions take place in a certain type of an order. So let's get into it. Okay, there's some of the uses, and hopefully we're getting this idea here that this whole blockchain, it's all about reliable, secure transactions, that a lot of it is taking out what is now being done by middlemen. It's basically a ledger. Back in the day, the accountants would go and write in pen and record their individual transactions in the ledger. And then they would have these checks against the distributor or this ledger that, oh yeah, we got to add up and apply the credits and debits, and they all have to equal across the different accounts, and then we'll have these other accountants come in and check all our work. So the whole idea with this ledger is that you are creating secure, reliable transactions inside of the blockchain. Security basically ties to a cryptographic key, public and private key, so that as you make the individual entry into the system, it's secured by that individual key. Distributed. There's multiple copies of the individual blockchain database. Because once again, we're just getting down to, it's a database. Any database people in here? It's just another database. And you'll hear, like with Bitcoin and mining, each one of the miners has a copy of the database. I'm sorry. We're getting to that. Easy. And this is any types of questions. Bring it forward, because it's not really, it's one of those, once you know it, it's easy. But it's this whole new technology, and you're hearing all these different things. There's cryptographic keys, and there are hashes, and there's mining, and there's oracles. And any types of questions as you're going along, just shout them out, or any types of comments. Say, nah, you got it wrong there. That's fine. So distributed and shared. So a whole bunch of different copies. And you'll see with blockchain as a service, basically what it does is just fire up a bunch of VMs with multiple distributed databases on it that do the verification across each one of the individual transactions. And it all comes down to this ledger. And a big word there. Immutable. Oh, write once is pretty big too. Same thing. Write once, immutable. In other words, you write it and it's there forever. And this whole distributed shared process has a verification system that we'll talk about in a little bit to make sure that it is immutable. It also makes it kind of tough when developers start looking at it, because basically once you publish the blockchain database, you don't change it. And it doesn't go to the outside and get information. Everything's self-contained. That's where those oracles and kind of stuff comes in. We'll talk about that later. We're just in 1.0 now. So, yeah.
So let's say, for instance, on the secure part, someone was to send a virus to it, would it destroy all of the nodes? How would you?
Well, it really can't, because it's only certain types of entries that are going to be recorded, and those entries are verified. And once they're verified, and you verify it by having it distributed and shared. So there's no, and that's why, like, you can't even call a web service now. 1.0, we're talking 1.0 now. We're talking Bitcoin level now. So you basically are just writing data into it. Another question? But yeah, and this whole immutable write once, very important. The whole idea of that ledger, just think of that accountant, writing in ink, screws up, he's got to write it in ink and fix it.
Take the blockchain and split it apart. What's the most basic amount of data or kind of data you have package, you could call it?
So think of it, if for the database people, think of it as a row in a table. So you're going to have, and really in blockchain, it's a transaction. If you're thinking about Bitcoin, you're talking about a financial transaction between parties. So from, to, amount, key, all kind of hashed together.
Does the ledger apply to some piece of business, some part of a business, one transaction, or multiple transactions unrelated?
So each individual entry will be a transaction. A block of transactions is what actually gets verified and then chained to the next block of transactions. Hang on. So
the space. Good morning. Good morning. You want to say something, Amanda? Drop your business card there. And thank you, Gravity IT. The drinks are provided by Gravity IT. Where are you guys? Can you guys stand over here? Huh? How are you guys doing? Appreciate that. Bernie, is Bernie here? Bernie stepped out, but with Gravity, go talk to the gentleman if you're interested in this. You guys saw my post, $700 million available for this kind of technology. If that sounds like a good number, you guys look into it. Did you say something?
No, it was dropped to this.
Even better. You guys heard all that?
Sorry, sir. No problem. All right, sorry about that little interruption there. So we're talking about this distributed, shared system. When you think about traditional types of systems, you'll have a stored ledger, but the stored ledger is maintained maybe at Uber. And they're the ones that are going and you're communicating with, and they're connecting you with a driver. So you're going through a middleman, or you're trading a stock, and you're actually going through a broker that then communicates with the system that's sending you the individual stock. Or you're buying a house and getting title insurance and going through that company that's then doing the whole big check of your deed and then issuing title insurance. So this is kind of what we're doing now, the traditional system. What blockchain is doing with those transactions is saying, okay, we're going to have this distributed shared system of the ledger that the transacting parties can go directly to. All stored in this ledger. From due, value. So you're asking earlier about, here's kind of what it looks like. And a copy of this goes around to each one of the individual people that are part of the distributed ledger. In Bitcoin, that happens to be what they call miners, or Ethereum, which is really the 2.0 we'll be getting to shortly. So they basically all have copies. And if you want one, you can go out and grab a copy and download it onto your system. How big of a system do you need? How big is the Bitcoin database now? It was a big week. And when do they compress it next, and so forth? So you go old as it gets bigger. I think Ethereum's around 80 gigs. I don't know. Maybe you compress the rest of that stuff and only have to compress it. Yes? It's an individual transaction type of a system. So a row and a table. Think of it as that. When you think about the debits and credits, that's just a verification system, right? Well, reporting and verification system. Along with the audits. We'll talk about verification in a little bit. But basically all across the network. So like if you took this blockchain as a service, and you go and you say, take this and we're going to base it upon Hyperledger or whatever. We'll get into all these different types of ledgers that are out there. It goes out and simply creates these ledgers on multiple VMs, as many as you want, depending upon the accuracy that you want of the verification. And then just fires off and you just write, so you start writing the transactions. And remember, even with 2.0, you aren't going to go to an outside web service, so you aren't going to be running anything. You're going to be writing it in an immutable way. Question? Thank you. Yes. We'll get to that slide. I don't got it right off the top of my head. I think of Ethereum's like the main one. Hyperledger's another big one. There's like 20 of them out there, and their slide's a couple of months old, so there's probably another 20 more. And every one is the greatest coming that you've ever seen. So if one of the databases is Not correct? And that's where the whole verification process comes into play. So this is the beauty, and this is why you have the distributed, and this is why when you do the blockchain as a service, so how many instances do you want? How many databases out there? How many verification checks do you want? To make sure that this is a correct transaction, immutable, right once, verified. So how do you account for? Yep. Ah, that's a good idea.
Here you go, sir. I got it. We got 2 mics for you.
So my question was, since the database is immutable and things do change, records and so forth, can you delete a row or can you add another columns if those databases are changing? If not.
Well, wait a second.
Yes.
Let's say that you can't to the original. So you have these things known as forks. Anybody heard of Bitcoin Cash? Bitcoin Gold? Cedric 2, oh, that didn't happen, that's right. That was like 3 days from happening. So those are actual, what they call hard forks in the blockchain. It actually changes the makeup of the block. So yeah, unless you, actually with Ethereum, here's the ultimate. There's an Ethereum Classic and an Ethereum. Some programmer actually scammed and wrote in a block and gave himself like 50 million Ethereum or something like that. So they said, we're going to fix this early on, and we're going to fork it once, and that's going to be it. So you now have an Ethereum Classic, and you have an Ethereum. You have a Bitcoin, and you have a Bitcoin Cash. I don't know if the Bitcoin Gold, anything happened with it. There was going to be a Sedgwick 2X. That didn't happen. They decided not to do it. They seem to be handling the transactions pretty well, though, which have been going crazy this last week, 2 weeks.
Thanks, Joe.
Ooh. 5-minute break. Let's grab pizza.
You don't need a hard fork.
Yeah, this is a hard fork here.
No, perfect question, too. Oh, you're in charge of the mic now. The last person that gets it's in charge of it.
Thank you, Gravity IT Resources, for the pizza.
Basically, the short answer is C#, Python, and JavaScript if you're going to do the blockchain as a service.
Well, I want to build my own. Maybe
Well, you got all the specs out there. You can, and all these different specs, Ethereum and. All right, getting a whole bunch of questions off group here that I think would be good for the group. So why don't we continue? As I am, keep eating your pizza. And let me do a little divergence here. So several of the questions. How do you go from Bitcoin to cash? Another one. Has Bitcoin ever been hacked? And the answers kind of go hand in hand. No, Bitcoin has never been hacked. There has been a few security releases by the programmers themselves, but the Bitcoin blockchain has never been hacked. You go from Bitcoin to other currencies through exchanges. Exchanges have been hacked. And maybe in like the biggest one ever, was it back in 2014, Mt. Gox? Probably by the purveyors of that exchange. So the problem isn't with blockchain, as it's been proven. The problem can occur in the individual exchanges, or you holding your individual private wallets, because these transactions are actually going, for the case of Bitcoin and Ethereum, going into individual wallets and somebody hacking into those. So when you hear $16 million, I said last week, $16 million in Bitcoin hacked. Yeah, somebody left their wallet out. I think last month somebody in Turkey got kidnapped. And they had to get their keys and put their keys in and transferred a few $1 million and so forth. But the blockchain itself has never been hacked. Here's an example of an exchange. Coinbase, which is out in the San Francisco area, started up by some Goldman Sachs characters a few years ago. It was doing rather well. And you can transfer from Bitcoin to cash, or to PayPal, or back. If you're going to go to cash, it's like 1.49%, and have to wait 5 days for it to clear. If you're going to PayPal, I think it's immediately, but it's also like 3.6% you're paying. In and out. In and out. There's some peer-to-peer ones out there. I think the cheapest you can get those is like around a little under 1%. However, if you're going Bitcoin to Bitcoin, small, tiny fraction of a transaction fee in there, but basically straightforward. So eventually, and where can you spend these? Here's another question. Anybody book travel and hotels online? Expedia. Anybody buy goods online? Overstock. Anybody buy pizzas? Domino's. So yes, there is this whole network, and of course, person to person, I'll happily work for Bitcoin, preferably Ethereum. But look at this number over a year. So Coinbase works in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. Say that Bitcoin's been going crazy, right? 2,043%. There's another one. Ethereum, which we'll talk about shortly. $8,500%. Oh, and Litecoin, another blockchain cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's kind of a laggard, isn't it? Of course, you're talking bigger numbers. So, some of the questions that were going on in between here. But just think of it, so we got this distributed ledger, or shared ledger. Somebody may, well, it's not really distributed because you don't need each part to add up to the whole, right? You got copies all over, it's shared. But they always refer to it as a distributed ledger. So it's copies of it that are then verified against each other. So you get all these transactions, and they add up to a hash. And you say, are these transactions all correctly adding up? Do you verify that? Do you verify that? Do you verify that? And the more verifications you have, the more surety you have that that block of transactions is correct. So wait a second, how do we do that in a public type of a fashion? How do we do that? If we're doing it internally, I've got my own machines. If I'm the US government and I'm putting out my own crypto dollar, I'll have my own servers all over the place, and those transactions will go through like that, the verifications. For the public, what they came up with Bitcoin, and Ethereum also uses, is this concept of mining. So basically with mining, they say, hey, we have a block here, and I'm giving you a mathematical puzzle to solve. And it is very hard to solve. You've got to throw basically a lot of hardware at it to be able to guess at what the actual amount is that we're looking for. And if you guess it correctly, then you get a Bitcoin or an Ether. So it's kind of like, you're just guessing at it. It's kind of like mining, going in and trying to find something. You hit the vein, great, you won. If you don't, you just lost all that time. But one miner gets it, says, here's your bit. Well, before they get it, they then go to the other miners and say, verify this. And that goes like that. But the actual process, and that's when you hear about mining, that's what they're doing, is saying in a public scenario, we're creating a verification process that we can rely upon. Now, Ethereum's coming up with a whole different type of, we'll see if it really works, but they do mining also. They're basically putting out that cryptographic puzzle that gets tougher as we go along, so you can't just throw more and more hardware at it and be able to solve it. And that's why you also hear, oh, Bitcoin isn't, or Ethereum isn't environmentally sound. Takes a lot of horsepower, takes a lot of electricity to perform that. But they're also all software engineers. It's all this distributed verification. Is mining maybe the best way of doing it? So far. But we'll see. Ethereum's coming up with a whole different type of verification system. It's not going to take as much, or at least as much electricity, but still be sound. Yes?
I mentioned this yesterday, the proof of stake on Ethereum. The guy's name is Vlad, and I'm engaged with him. He's basically said if you have any technical questions, we're going to do a fireside chat with him. So anybody in the technical stuff working on proof of stake, I got the main software engineer of Ethereum, his ear, and I'm trying to look for as many technical, hard questions I can fire off to him to get. So it's an open door. Pardon me? Just Chad at ecorp.com. Chad, C-H-A-D, at ecorp, E-C-O-R-P.com.
Did you say E-Corp? Is that like on a TV show or something? Actually, that'd be a good one to have. Yeah, good luck with that one. But you never know. You never know. It's good advertisement, I guess. I don't know. So, okay, so basically just hitting a couple of questions that I got during the session and hopefully bringing forward this idea of a shared ledger that gets verified in each one of the individual blocks. And that's basically how it works. Go back to the slides here. Oh, and if you want things like, you go to blockchain.info. Is that the right one? No, that's not it. Blah. Am I still off? This eye is giving me all sorts of trouble. Let's see, I might have it in this one already. I might have it in IE. I like the privacy better there. Notice the difference in prices too. If you go to the futures, it's going to be like 16,100 or something like that. Blockchain.org. Oh, I'm off the screen, aren't I? Or blockchain.co. Here, let's try this. Oh, there we go. So another thing with this blockchain, oh, it's for all the crooks, right? It's the most verifiable financial or otherwise transaction system out there. You basically have an individual transaction and you have that ID. You can trace it all the way through the block or blocks from its creation. The only reason that's used so much by the bad guys is because the good guys don't have any clue. So here's another good one, blockchain.info, all the different stats, the microprice, block sizes, orphan blocks. Here's the transactions per block, average number of transactions that fit into each block, individual block. All right. Where's that at? There it is, right? So what really qualifies as a blockchain type of a project? Are you crossing trust boundaries? Vendor-customer type of a scenario. Are really multiple parties manipulating the same data? When you're calling into Uber, and then and Uber's communicating with that driver, aren't they sharing the same basic information? Are there any intermediaries, middlemen, that control the ledger or the single source of truth? And it is a lot of really just manual verification steps that in many cases when you're calling that hotel registration desk drive you crazy. Or customer support anywhere. Well, almost anywhere. So a little example of where blockchain could have a lot of potential in the different types of areas. I'm kind of guessing that probably if you look at this individual slide here, everybody falls into one of these different areas. Basically, wherever you're performing any types of transactions, you have intermediaries, and it's really not a difficult transaction where you require a very smart intermediary. So asset transfer, cross-organizational workflow, audits. So basically everything that we've been talking about is blockchain, or what is considered by many, and this is just definitions thrown out there, you can call it anything you want, blockchain 1.0. Or Bitcoin. Basically, Bitcoin was created back as part of the whole financial disaster with a white paper as a proof of concept for financial transactions. And that's all it does, is financial transactions. It's a specific implementation from the ground up to be able to create a blockchain type of a database that can get these shared verifiable transactions out there. So basically just a simple ledger records the transactions. Blockchain 2.0, or Ethereum, it adds additional logic through what they call smart contracts. So you have code and various terms inside of the individual blockchain. In other words, customizable to your own individual scenario so that you can build that Maersk tracking system or that Webjet hotel reservation system, because you can change the block to include specific information, at least at the beginning of the individual blockchain, that you want for it. So when you start thinking about blockchain 2.0, you're really more talking about a blockchain framework that you can work within. And Ethereum is an example of this. It's basically a framework. Follow this. You change the, you got this standardization related to creating the block. Somebody was talking about creating their own individual blockchain from scratch, which is fairly difficult. White paper's out there. You can go and grab it. Start building away, customizing it yourself. What Ethereum does is give you a framework to actually start with, gives you so much of the block, and then you customize a section of it for what you're using. And basically, this is the smart contract area of it. Doesn't have to be a financial transaction, it can be anything. Any type of transaction, and that's where developers come into play. So, here you go, here's a few of them. Ethereum, Corda, Hyperledger, Sawtooth Lake. Got another slide with a whole bunch more. Each one's the second coming. At least talk to their executives, and that's what you'll hear. Blockchain, you just have the simple transactions. Now with 2.0, you have this generic transactions. You have this framework where you can actually say and define what the transaction is inside of it. You basically have one blockchain with 1.0. Now you can split off to a more, somebody's bringing up distributed as opposed to shared type of a system. And really blockchain 1.0 was public only. So they had to go through you have to go through this mining process as part of the verification process. Really, when all you're doing is saying, hey, I verify this, I add everything up, it comes to this. Do you get the same thing? Yes, I get the same thing. Do you get the same thing? Yes. And you know, with computers, it's like that. What takes a long time with the public and the whole mining type of a process is that you got to solve this to make sure that there's only one that's out there that's going to come up with it, and then everybody else verifies after that. You have different ways to reach this consensus or this verification with blockchain 2.0. Things like the individual identity, voting. Blockchain 2.0 can be closed, crafted around whatever the individual business solution is. Those first examples that I was showing you were basically specifically customers to their vendors, or even higher up on the individual chain. And we have, I don't know if I take that green part out. So we had blockchain 1.0, simple ledgers, simply record the transactions. 2.0, Ethereum, Hyperledger, etc. You have a logic tier inside of there. And somebody was asking about the languages to put in there. With Microsoft, it's going to be Python, JavaScript, and C#, I believe, are your options if you're going to take their blockchain as a service. And now you have this whole, hey, you know, you got logic inside of there, but you can't go to the outside, right? Everything's still self-contained, immutable. With blockchain 3.0, now you're going to have this way of going out and actually querying web services, APIs, but still maintaining this verifiable shared ledger or distributed ledger, in this case, type of a scenario. And you might have heard of oracles. Well, oracles are basically calling out to these web services and giving this type of a capability. So I, you know, that whole Microsoft innovation, I don't know about. So this is actually turned into their blockchain as a service. It was originally called Project Bletchley. And you could use their individual blockchain as a service to go out, fire up a whole bunch of VMs with your customized distributed ledger applied to it. In other words, they're doing all the same old startup type of stuff. And then you're adding the custom scriptlets in there to customize it in your own individual fashion for whatever purpose that you're going to be wanting to use it for. Whatever types of transactions that you're going to use it for. And here we go. I told you this slide was coming. There's a bunch of them. And I'm sure some people could fire off another 6, 12 that aren't on here. It's a 2-month-old slide. How you do it is basically fire up, select the individual, fire up your Azure portal, select the individual technology that you want to base it upon, define the number of VMs or the number of verifications you want to go through, votes you want to go through, or however you define it, for your verification process. And it goes, distributes them all, and then you can apply your custom logic to it. And if you show up at Code Camp, I'm going to do one. When is Code Camp? Surprised that didn't get, where'd he go? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, any questions? That'll be it.
What is the recommended number of web servers to fire up when you put one together for verification?
So I think the default here is 4. I think that's the minimum that you want to start with. I don't know if there is a recommended out there. That I have to look up. As far as Microsoft's concerned, just, yeah, them all out there. You know, there might be a thing that, an actual calculation that goes along with them based upon number of transactions or speed of the transactions. But I don't know that. But that's a good question. I'll look into that more.
As a SaaS service, if I go with the 4 servers, is this particular service have an add-on cost to it per transaction, or how is it cost?
No, from what I've seen, the actual service is based upon the actual VM use. So what it's doing is they're just trying to get you to fire up VMs and then get charged for the VMs. And basically what it does is put it out in a, you know, for those that know Azure, they have these concepts of resource groups, and it basically creates the resource groups, and then you can put your customizations into Azure functions that can be incremented into the ledger or forked into the ledger. But the idea is once you got that individual transaction defined, then you follow it until the fork. And if it's private, then, you know, maybe you fork it more often. Public, as you've seen, what it takes to do a fork. However, there is a concept of a soft fork, which I guess the original Sedgwick was. But if you're going to go, like the block size, I believe is, or the transaction size is a megabyte for Bitcoin. If you're going to take that to 2, you're going to do a hard fork, which is basically what Bitcoin Cash did. Yes?
Sorry.
Oh yeah, can you fork a fork? Absolutely. Yeah, the question was, what if you fork it? Can you fork it again or change the actual transaction? Absolutely. It's not something, so it's not like, you know, your usual development type of thing, or even your usual database type of thing, all right? And you want to get that thing, when you launch it, you want to make sure it's ready to go, because forking it is a forking problem.
So what would be a typical bad use of this technology? Like what shouldn't you use this technology for?
Well, you're only going to be using this technology, and actually they have a pretty good slide here with it. Really this type of a criteria. If you have any types of dynamic data, it is a immutable transaction ledger. So it's going to be specific types of contract scenarios, or what they now call the smart contracts. So yeah, is everybody going to be just, well, everybody is eventually going to be using it because everybody does this type of stuff. And probably not the most efficiently way of doing it, because you're going through all these intermediaries that verify it all for you.
Sir, when you mentioned earlier, you were talking about the encryption part and the public-private key. Is this going to be based like on the 509 certificate type of technology? And can you address that, how the cryptology plays?
So if you're creating your own individual blockchain, you're going to define your individual own one. What's Bitcoin? Isn't that the SHA-256 or something? Anyway, no. Yeah. So whoever defines the original individual blockchain, you're going to be defining how those transactions are going to be written. And, of course, read.
In one of the first slides, it mentioned how it encourages the competitors to participate with each other. Can you speak a little bit about that and what the purpose and benefits of that is?
So competitors to... So again, back here. Oh. Nope. So if there's transactions between competitors, sure. I don't have enough rooms. Do you have a room? I got to move a customer from this hotel to this. Can you back us up? I don't have enough room on this flight. Can you put them on another flight? I'm just coming off the top of my head. But yeah, if there's going to be transactions or contracts between, you know, whether you're competitors or, you know, it's a customer vendor type of a scenario. However, you kind of, even though you're competitors, you turn into a customer vendor. Or you're dealing with competitors. Look at that recovery.
How many drinks, Joe?
How about if I just do this? There.
Joe, yeah, I see more the potential for implementation like workflow. Let's say, for instance, you're one customer, but you're picked up at home by Uber. And then the blockchain is contained, let's say, by the new train in Miami to take you to Orlando. And in Orlando hooks up with a Delta flight or a Canada Air flight or something like that. And then picked up by a cab, taking you to Toronto. There's only one customer, one transaction, one charge. They all share your pay, but they all have to be registered under one chain.
Yep, and that's kind of where a distributed type of ledger would come in, where the ledger's talking to each other, which was the 2.0 type of functionality. So yeah.
Delta, Southwest, etc. We'll get you a car, we'll get you a hotel, we'll get you into restaurants. I think you're seeing more and more of that. And these are very complex transactions, so this is the type of technology that allows you to make one payment and be able to do all those things. Cruise ships is another one.
Well,
all
like
the
Webjet.
outings they have and all
First
the
example. Webjet and hotels. First example. Yeah. So is blockchain perfectly clear now?
Breaking all the encryption stuff.
Well, won't they have quantum computing to be able to generate the problems? Yeah, that's actually one of the Q&As. So they'll just crank it up. And yeah, and supposedly, and I haven't really looked into it, maybe somebody else has, the Ethereum is coming up with a different method than mining in a public type of verification scenario. And I really haven't investigated it, but I did see where they're saying that potentially over the next couple of years, they'll be moving away from mining. And like you're saying, it's environmentally not that great of a solution because you're sucking down all that power. Yeah.
There's many different consensus methodologies, and proof of work is not the only one, and it's going to go out the window, right? And you also have to think that many blockchain implementations don't need the security that proof of work at SHA-256 implements. Many people here are talking about doing their own blockchain. If you're doing your own blockchain, if you're building a private blockchain and using Microsoft's layer, you won't need proof of work to do the encryption or to do the consensus. The encryption is easy. That's done in a second. We do it all the time with HTTPS and everything else. But the consensus methodology of a private blockchain that I think most people are probably thinking about implementing does not need SHA-256 and the
It's going to go like that.
And the proof of work. It's really...
Yeah, you look at the mining scenario, and the whole thing is in solving the problem. It's not, the verification goes like super fast after that. So if you're in private, you don't need that whole type of consensus and that whole solving the problem type of scenario. So yeah, Webjet doesn't do that. They just have their different types of verification set up.
Joe, from a database standpoint, if you were to look at a cut and see some kind of schema, let's say there's a blockchain for trade, the containers and all that kind of stuff, it will be more like an EDI transaction that everybody has to agree on, the layout itself of that transaction?
Well, I would imagine that you probably would, so you're talking about the original schema of the transaction. And yeah, depending upon who you're working with, it'll probably be a joint type of an effort. But I'm sure like Webjet itself just define their own schema and put it out there. A lot of the private will be like that. Now, if you're going to be doing a scenario where you're talking about you're going to get flow and you're going to be going through, you'd be probably say, hey, I want to put out this blockchain. Do you agree with this information going into the transaction? So I imagine that there will be some type of a consensus. Do I know of any that are now like that? No. But it makes sense.
I have a couple questions relating to the mining itself. You said you have to solve a very hard problem. Couple questions on that. First of all, where do these problems come from? Is that part of the Bitcoin implementation itself?
Yes.
It's embedded inside of that?
Yes.
And
and it actually increases in complexity as time goes on.
Okay, now this problem, what is it, like just a mathematical problem, or how is it?
So it's basically coming up with a hash total. And the only way that you come up with it is by guessing it. So you basically run through the mathematical calculation so many times and then say, is this right, is this right, is this right, is this, and then boom. You
So
hit
it's a slot machine.
It's mining. I mean, it's a great term for it, actually. You're going in there and I think there's some stuff here. Let me go and see if I can find it.
So is it one algorithm that has all these different Bitcoins hidden in it, or is it multiple algorithms?
So yeah, it doesn't have, it's actually tied to the block.
It's tied to the block, okay.
Right. So the idea is, hey, you came up with this hash total, which is the equivalent of the block. Now you send that out to all the other miners and they verify, oh yeah, now that you got the answer, I know what it is and I can verify that.
And here's your reward.
But the actual process of mining is basically just throwing computing power at this problem that keeps getting harder. So like I don't know, how often does it change now? Like every 6 months? 5 weeks? Even daily? So every one, it keeps going up. So I got involved with mining back in 2014 just as kind of like a hobby. And basically the equipment I got from Bitmain Tech over in China, really after 6 months, it became worthless. Or not worthless, but it didn't make sense. Well, looking back on it now, it would have.
Did you make any Bitcoin out of it?
Oh yeah.
I did too. I did 0.3, which was, I don't know, it was not worth the $200.
Don't tell anybody.
Who cares? Who cares?
See, that's...
You could make more money by buying it.
No. Well, back then.
How much did it cost?
So I basically applied my cost, and it was a little less than, but the Bitcoin price would change so much. When I first started, I was making a bunch, and then it dipped, and it's like, hey, you aren't making that much, and then it goes up again. So I think overall, by the time I started and finished, slightly less than actually buying it. But you got your time into it too. That's including all the electricity and stuff.
You're the first miner who made money on mining. You know
Really?
that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I wish I kept going now for another 6 months. Even though it would have been a fraction of what I originally got.
If you put $1,000 on your equipment, after, let's say, a month, you get $1,001, right? Now you have $1,001 in Bitcoin after a month. I put in $1,000 a month before you. I now have $2,000.
Hmm?
Your mining goal, but you could also buy it.
Hmm? Yep. And next year when it's $100,000. Well, yeah, and if you're going to do this yourself, you aren't going to try and mine your own Bitcoin. You're going to go into a pool that pulls together a whole bunch. Because your chance as an individual mining an individual Bitcoin, it's pretty, it's pretty tough. Or Ethereum. Ethereum works under the same concept. I think it's a group of 7 people, right? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, where did Bitcoin come from? Nope, a programmer called Satoshi, which was pretty funny back in 2014. CNBC thought they found him in Southern California. And this poor guy, they just camped in his yard for days until he finally goes off. I'm a programmer, I don't know anything about Bitcoin, leave me alone. But there's a bunch of rumors. It's a group of, what do you say, 7 programmers? Or that are supposedly, a bunch of them are now part of Bitcoin Core developers. Maybe. Maybe.
The question is, would you pay money for it? I
Yeah.
wouldn't.
What would you pay?
One, do you think it's solvable? And 2, how much is it worth to solve it?
Oh, well, I think this whole idea of Satoshi and being this mystical type of thing is great. I don't want to know. I'm more interested in my Ethereum anyway.
There's a group trying to fork and is trying to take Satoshi's wallet's money. So there's a big backlash going on right now in the core. Because a group is trying to get his unused $10 billion in Bitcoin.
They will a minute before the universe ends. That's a calculation. That's how encryption works.
But yeah, the rumors and stuff that goes around. This poor guy, I remember back when they found Satoshi. I think he was outside of San Diego. And this poor guy, they were just hounding him.
Joe, how do they have a hard cap on the number of Bitcoins that can be
It's
mined?
all defined in the original formulation.
Why can't you just keep going, figuring out all the different transactions that are...
Well, because it's basically hard-coded into it. I guess you could fork it. You could fork it and do more. But basically, I don't know, what's the date now? Is it 2025? Well, no, it's not that far.
Google it with Bing.
Really? Okay. Google it with Bing. All right. I thought it was much sooner, and basically you're going to have to figure out a way to cover the transactions, which will probably just increase the transaction cost to pay for it.
There is a cap to the Bitcoin. I think
Right,
it's
so-
M1 at this point. Is it?
So basically, Bitcoin keeps expanding through this mining process, right?
Right.
But there's a hard limit on it, on how many are actually going to be mined or is allowed to be mined.
See, for me, that makes...
Which
if it
means
is-
that it's actually more valuable than gold.
Yeah, I mean, if you're buying it as an asset, but if you're buying it to exchange goods and services...
Well, then it's just a medium of exchange.
Right, that makes...
But it'll end at the same time. Think about it. As a dollar.
As a what?
As a dollar will. I'm not making a joke. In $120,
Is it really that long?
because we're going to be using dollars, or are we going to be communicating that thing over here and flying in space? No, I'm not kidding. That's not a joke.
Well, I'm sure the U.S. government wants us to use crypto dollars that aren't there yet, but I'm sure they'll have them.
And that was the thing, I think, with the stock price was, theoretically, there's a hard code of 21 million, but when the core gets together and says we want to double it, that's when there's speculation.
But you'll have
It's
to
like,
fork it.
well, it's not theoretically, it is mutable, and then the thing is to do now is to fork. So you take, it's open source, you can code fork it, but the key is you have to have a core group of developers. And so what I love about the technology is if you don't continue getting better, somebody else behind you will. So if you look at it, there's not a lot of core developers running Ethereum, Bitcoin. So you could probably see countries coming up now, they're creating their own stuff, and they're using some of these forks, and they start their own, and now you don't have to be transaction fees. And that's why Litecoin's going going through the roof right now because it's providing utility value. My suggestion is if you are going to invest in cryptos, because this is just really a transfer of value, I want to go like we're creation of value. So where is the value being created, not transferred? And so that's, I look at assets that are underutilized that technology extracts. Like I use the metaphor of, what do you call that? The oil fracking, right? So oil's down in the ground, but we can't get to it until fracking comes along. If I know fracking's coming along, I'm going to go buy the land, not necessarily the fracking. Same thing I think with Bitcoin right now. There's a lot of speculation, but it's creating markets and movements. And so look for the assets that are creating underutilized assets that are getting utility value out of blockchain.
And something to else consider, we had this huge move in just this last couple of weeks with the future contracts. Those are full price future contracts. They aren't leveraged. So you got to basically buy in. You don't buy one and get 10. Within a few months, it's going to be leveraged, and you're just, then a bubble might occur, or short-term bubble. I'll take them.
That's the time to buy.
Yep.
When Apple crashes, that's when you buy Apple.
I don't know. It's a one-product company, isn't it? It's a product that'll disappear in 3 years. The phone.
I've had digitalcurrency.com since 1999, so I've been following this since I think the beginning. But it needs to be a good reset, right? Because this is just crazy. But I think where we're going to go in X amount of years, but it needs to be a reset because right now the technology isn't keeping up with everything else, and they're feeling the pressure too, as well. But the floor is going to be set. $100 million. I know 2 groups have $100 million waiting on something to come in at 10 grand. And so once we start setting that next floor, then we'll see where it goes. But you're taking it from gold, right? So, you know, I think blockchain and Bitcoin still need to find more utility value because it's still hard to use. It's still hard to do, still hard to use, but it's got potential.
Utility value is selling this technology to your boss and getting paid for it.
Yep.
That's my utility. That's
we need to create our own blockchain. And no, we don't need to buy a Bitcoin to do it. That's like one of the slides that I left out. It's like, what do you mean? We have to go out and buy a Bitcoin to start this? It's like, you know, something about the, I'm sorry, what? Is that in there? Yep. And like I said, this is the 2-month-old slide, so there's probably 10 more. All the latest, greatest that you've ever seen that are going to take over every part of the market. Yeah, which one is Goldman's? Goldman's doing one too, right? Yep. Goldman's trading on the futures market now for their clients and covering Bitcoin.
Joe, I read that there's some kind of limit on also, or bandwidth limit on how many transactions per second can be done. And this is not in the case of mining, but just doing transactions. Why is that? Why is it? It seems like there's a throttle there on transactions with Bitcoin.
So yeah, I mean, it's all just, it's software. I mean, it's, you know, it's how much miners do you have out there? How many transactions can you handle? It's a 1 megabyte, and that's one of the big things with Bitcoin Cash.
Bitcoin has a limited number of transactions it has due to the limited supply of the Bitcoin. So like we were talking about a couple minutes ago, the amount of Bitcoin that's available and the amount of Bitcoin that's rewarded when you figure out that block is what causes new Bitcoin to get entered into the environment. And it's a limited supply, it's a controlled supply. And as we were talking about that mathematical calculation before, the difficulty of that mathematical calculation has changed so that the block, a new chain on a block, is only added every 10 minutes. As you get more... No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the miner gets a reward for getting the next block on the chain. And the difficulty factor of the formula is adjusted. And it's adjusted to keep an equal amount of Bitcoin entering the environment so that that 21 million is only released in totality at a certain time. So you're not flooding the market. So that's why Bitcoin only has you have to wait 10 minutes for transactions to complete. And that's what is seen as a negative. That can be addressed, kind of as Joe was saying, with just different software. If you say, well, you know what, we'll do 1/10 of the reward every minute, now your transaction speed is different. So that's the underlying reason why Bitcoin transactions take 10 minutes to get into the chain. Not because you don't have enough miners, but because the complexity factor or the difficulty factor of the calculation to keep the flow of new Bitcoin into the environment is set.
And it's set at 1 Bitcoin, like you said. You set it to 1/10 of a Bitcoin, and you increase it tenfold. You know, how about Bitcoin Cash? That's how fast is that? That's like a minute, isn't it?
Same distance as the blockchain.
Ethereum's like 15 seconds or something.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody knew about IOTA, which is a different cryptocurrency that uses Tangle.
You mean the 4th largest one?
Instead of
It actually became the 4th largest.
What's the difference between Tangle and BitChain?
So really what you're getting at is the difference between all the different cryptocurrencies. So they're all blockchain implementations. You're going to have different types of transaction throughput. But what really makes the difference to me is, can you go up to Coinbase or one of the individual ones and transfer that money somewhere? So it's more distributed. Yeah, we had the discussion about shared and distributed earlier when we were getting our pizza.
So what's the consensus on, what's the point of view on consensus-based blockchain, specifically the scalability and the speed of the consensus approach versus the other ones?
So you mean like proof of stake, identity, vote?
Yeah. Specifically the scalability and the speed.
So I think a lot of it comes down to whether it's a public or private. In the public, you're going to be limited. However, am I the only one that heard this about the Ethereum where they're coming up with a different type of verification system? So you've heard that also? Well, but I'm talking about Ethereum, actually, the Ethereum that's traded as financial currency or as a currency. Supposedly getting, you know, actually going beyond the mining, so all of a sudden all this stuff, it's all just software problems. But yeah, I've heard like within the next couple of years, Ethereum won't be on or they plan on it not being on this mining method for verification, for consensus. But I haven't really dug into and seen what the plans are and how they're going to implement them. So proof of work, stake, identity.
No, You got to tell us where we're going to see the answers. No, then you got all the good stuff, all the questions, and you get all the answers. We want the answers, and you got to figure out the questions. All right, mister, I'm not going to hire you as a presenter because I didn't get my question answered. It's like I can put Bitcoin in out of your ATM, but I can't take it out. That's worthless to me.
Wait a second, we getting paid for this?
I did. I don't know what you, Joe.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it in real detail yet, but I will. But anyway, maybe we can wrap this up, and if you want to just do it on a networking type of a basis. Like I said, if you go to Code Camp, I'm going to do a session on this. I'll just do a couple of real introductory slides, and then go in and we'll create a blockchain as a service. And if I get really good at it, I'll say, you pick the ledger. And there'll probably be 10 more once again by then. It's 2 months from now, right?
Joe, could you put the South Florida Code Camp website up too, so let everybody know? So where they can go see you? You guys, everybody know where South Florida Code Camp's going to be and how to get to it? How about this? I should ask, who doesn't know? All right. So right now, check out the website,
SF, right? Codecamp.com.
SFcodecamp.com.
I didn't get it? Yeah, I got it. My other eye's good.
All right, guys, so we're going to wrap
this
up.
This is great. So we'll wrap it up, and basically, any other types of questions, let me turn it over to Dave, who runs the meetings. We did your whole Code Camp sample or announcement already, though.
Yeah. Just in case you don't know where to get to it. Guys, thank you. We do this every second Tuesday of the month. Check out the website, meetup.com/FLA.net, D-O-T-N-E-T, or the FLA.net. Second one. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So there's Xamarin Meetup. Just went to it. It was awesome. We went to it with Praveen, where we had about VR. Check us out next January. Are we going to have one on February? It's the beginning of the month. We'll see. Check out the website. You'll only know if you go to the website. Meetup.com/FLA.net. See you guys.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah. Oh, It's the most accountable financial transaction that's out there, but we just don't do it. And it's not you can encourage them so that they can actually
sounds like a seed event. Should we try to find what's going on with the check out? It does state as an address.
Yeah, yesterday.